Federico from the St. Louis Blues will join us here in a couple minutes. I like Bernie Federico. He's a good man. Right now, though, Show Me Institute Development Director David Stokes joins us. Good morning, David Stokes.
Good morning, McGraw. Good morning, Kelly.
The Loop Trolley is just, days away from being completed. This is fantastic.
What? Is it really days away?
Okay. Well, it's a number of days.
It's getting right. Yes,
it's getting there.
It is. It may be more days.
So, but they're short. I thought this was taken care of.
Well, that's yes. So did everybody, and most importantly, a year or so ago, when directly asked at a university city meeting, what will happen if there are cost overruns, and the manager of the project said, if there are cost overruns, the TDD, which is the Transportation Development District, they formed to help fund it.
Right.
They said the TDD will cover the cost overruns.
Beautiful. So what's the problem?
Well, now that there are cost overruns, amazingly enough, they don't want the TDD to cover the cost overruns. It's far easier just to go to St. Louis County and say, you got a big pot of money here for transit and transit funding. Why don't you give us $3 million to help make our federal match to cover this cost overrun? The problem is that elected officials and bureaucrats are never held responsible for their errors or their prior statements that they suddenly just change their mind on. And you see it the same with Washington Avenue and the Rams Stadium. For promises made 10 years ago or 20 years ago with the stadium that and then they act like they've never said these things in the past. And now they're just going to build a new stadium or let Washington Avenue crumble, or in this case, let general taxpayers fund the Loop Trolley when they specifically said they were never going to do that.
So how much are they over for the Loop Trolley?
About $8 million. There's a series of blog posts that my colleague Joe Miller wrote that I have to recommend to people that you can read at showmeinstitute.org. It details, A, that they were aware of these cost overruns a while back, well before they went public with it. You just can't go public with this at the beginning of the project.
Right.
You have to wait till the project's well along and maybe, 2/3 done, and then you tell people about the cost overruns.
Right. So they're $8 million over, and they want St. Louis County to kick in $3 million, which would then trigger some type of federal grant or something.
Well, there's an existing federal grant, but as Joe carefully details, it's not like this is new federal money that would come in to save the Loop Trolley project. This is money that's been granted to the St. Louis region for transit projects, for buses, light rail, whatever. So if you're taking it from buses and light rail for the Loop Trolley, you're not spending it on things that will actually move people and do the job of transit. The Loop Trolley is a very expensive toy, and it'll be fun. It might look cute clankering down the Del Mar Boulevard, but it's not public transportation.
Did they explain why it's $8 million over?
Almost all of these projects go over, which is why you have to build in a contingency fund. And they built in, I believe, about a 15% contingency fund, which proved out to be not enough. So now they need $8 million more, and instead of making the Transportation Development District pay for it, which could involve things like the property owners along the loop paying for it through a property tax for the TDD, or higher fares for people who they anticipate might use the Loop Trolley. No, it's so much easier to just ask for the huge pot of sales tax dollars that they have in the county and just get the money that way. But people need to be held responsible for their promises of a year ago and not just allowed to say, it'll be easier to go for the big pot of money there.
The other thing that's offensive to me, and sort of off topic, but kind of on topic, is when they do have a development that uses TIF money and tax increment financing or whatever else, like Chesterfield Valley, and then they make the splash that says, we paid off our TIF long before we ever said we would. So that shows you how successful this development is. Well, if it was so successful and you paid it off 20 years before you had to, why did you need the tax money in the first place? Couldn't you have just done it on your own, not needing the government money to help you finance it?
That's absolutely true, and the Chesterfield Valley one is an excellent example of that. And you see that. Unfortunately, most TIFs don't pay off early.
Right.
So, but when you do have these, it's a bird in the hand problem, and a lot of the writings we do on subsidies discuss this. The politician, the economic development planner, they see, we did a subsidy, this development happened, bird in the hand. We caused this successful development. Well, the fact is that a market economy works much more like what's behind the bush.
Yeah.
You didn't do the subsidy,
Yeah.
and something is going to happen. People aren't just going to bury their money in mattresses.
So-
now, it might not. Now, the problem in a place like St. Louis with so many different competing municipalities
Right.
is it actually matters to that. If you're the economic development official in City A, it's important that you get that project in City A. If you're trying to think about the region, well, it doesn't really matter which city it's in. It should go to where it's best invested. But we have all these hyper competition in a bad way as cities engage in this race to the bottom, and the Loop Trolley is just another example of it.
Did I tell you my sister's a city councilwoman in Scottsdale, and I was down there for the Thanksgiving, and we were going past some development, and she said, "Oh, this was a highly contested development thing," and I said, "Oh, did you give a TIF?" And she goes, "No," and I was like, "Well, how much money did you give to the builder to build that?" And she looked at me, she's like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "Well, no, how much money did you give the builder to build that here as opposed?" She just couldn't compute. She was like, "I would be run out of town on a rail if I gave a developer a nickel to build something." And I was like, "Well, that's a different philosophy in St. Louis."
We need to adopt that philosophy. And you have told me that story before, and I love it because it's so. Here we give, and we have all sorts of videos or writings at showmeinstitute.org. We gave Laclede, the city of St. Louis gave Laclede Gas $7 million in TIF to move 2 blocks. I mean, they moved the company 2 blocks, and here's $7 million for your troubles. And there's a Mercedes dealership on Hampton Boulevard that got a tax subsidy. I mean, they're subsidizing Mercedes dealerships now. And I don't want to pretend like I'm aiming at the city. We've seen TIFs in St. Louis County that are every bit as egregious, and TIFs in St. Charles, at least in St. Louis County and St. Charles, the county officials sometimes fight back against it.
Right.
But we saw what it took for the people of Ellisville to rise up and stop one development, and that was years and years of battles.
And they actually tossed the mayor out on an trumped-up impeachment charge.
And he had to fight to come back. I mean, that took years to win one battle, and most cities just don't have the effort to fight these types of subsidies.
David Stokes, quickly, where do we find all these blog posts?
Joe Miller's got a series of blog posts on the Loop Trolley at showmeinstitute.org.
Have a good week.
Thanks, McGraw. Thanks, Kelly.
846 KTRS. Let me tell you.